Hello, fifth graders. It's time for another social studies lesson. This assignment is going to be called the Jamestown Colony. Now, imagine you come home from school to find that without your permission or knowledge, someone has begun building a new home in your backyard. When you confront them about this, they defend their right to do so, saying the space was just empty grass and trees. You clearly wasn't using it anyway. Imagine that. And keep these crucial questions in mind as well. What were the reasons for the English colonization in America? Why did the King of England want an American colony? So now let's start at the beginning. Let's have a little background. The Virginia Company was assigned land in the New World by the King of England. They had high hopes of making a lot of money by growing and making things in their colony that they could ship back to England for a profit. To do this, they needed a labor force. A labor force is a group of people to do work. That is a labor force. The Virginia Company advertised for colonists. Anyone who agreed to make the journey was promised 50 acres of land and a share in the profits. That was quite an offer. About 1,000 people accepted. A ship set sail for the New World. Some European countries, including England, were in competition to increase their wealth and power by expanding their empires to America. England wanted to establish an American colony to increase her wealth and power. England hoped to find gold and silver in America, as was the Spanish had done in Mexico and South America. So let's look at Jamestown, the first permanent English colony. And your key word is permanent. I would like for you to go to Edpuzzle and look at this video. It's going to give us an introduction to the Jamestown colony. After you finish the video, come back to this video PowerPoint. Jamestown. Jamestown, Virginia was the first permanent English settlement established in the New World. It was founded by the London Company in 1607 for the purposes of making profits. Now, where is Jamestown located? If you look on our map, keep in mind these were not states then. These at the time are going to be 13 colonies, but right now they're just Native American land. But Jamestown is right here. So you see where Virginia is, and obviously this is Maryland. So this little red dot, that is Jamestown. That's where the first colony that the settlers made when they came over, and I'm going to repeat myself, to the Native American land. But keep in mind, at the time, though, these were not states yet. Okay, when Jamestown first came, they were just Native American tribes. That's where they lived. Jamestown voyage began in 1606 as an economic venture. Economic means money. It was all about money. Jamestown was the name of an area selected by the Virginia Company to be the new home of these colonists. It was a swampy area near an island connected to the mainland by a sandbar. It was selected because the Virginia Company believed it could be defended. The colonists were not worried about the natives. The Indians in the area seemed friendly. They were worried about the Spanish invasion. I want you to notice that they chose an area right here surrounded by water. Now, why do you think they thought this would be a good area to settle in? And this is the James River, this is your peninsula. So keep your thought in mind. We're going to go back to your thought about why do you think they thought this area would be a good place to settle. There were 5 reasons the settlers chose the site at Jamestown. And by the way, this is one of the very first maps of Virginia. This is how Virginia looked way back in 1606. So let's look at 5 reasons the settlers chose the site at Jamestown. Number 1, an American settlement would furnish raw materials that could not be grown or obtained in England. Now, you remember in our last video, with the video before that one, we talked about how they had to get raw materials because they could not obtain them in England. And hopefully you're seeing some of your vocabulary words and why I had you learn those words last week. What raw materials do you see? I see lumber, as in trees. What other raw materials do you see? Number two, the location could be easily defended from attack by sea. The English feared a sea attack by the Spanish. Now, obviously, they would be afraid of a sea attack because they decided to settle where? Right here. They decided to settle on the water. And keep in mind, they didn't have roads back then. So everything was done by the sea. And remember, our continent is North America. What's under us? Where as the video told us about a month or so ago, South America is in the bottom bunk. Number three, the water along the shore was deep enough for ships to dock. If you're on the water, you have to dock your ships. You cannot let your ships to be idly by or they would simply float away. So they felt there would be a good area because they could dock their ships. Number four, the English believed they had a good supply of fresh water. Now, see, they didn't have Miss Lofton for science because, see, they didn't understand that the ocean is what kind of water. You're so smart. The ocean is seawater. It is salt water, seawater, oceans. That is not fresh water. So they should have had me for science. Number five, an American settlement would open new markets for trade. So they felt like if they trade there, everyone would come to through them and be able to trade. What do you think they traded for? And remember, they were coming from England. So what do you think they traded for? Sewing needles came from England. England needed raw materials such as tobacco, lumber. They also manufactured goods such as furniture and muskets. After the Jamestown settlement made money, the investors were supposed to get a profit from their money because remember, they came over here for economic reasons. So they're supposed to get a profit. They was not going to send them over here and not bring anything back to England. So they were supposed to get a profit. The choice of the location, it didn't work out too well for them. The colonists soon ran out of game. What do you think is game? If you said animals, you're correct. They ran out of game on the island, and fresh water was in short supply because you guys know they're around a lot of salt water. There is not fresh water in the ocean. So, yeah, they ran out of fresh water very quickly. They also had other problems. The colonists were badly equipped to start a colony. About half of the colonists had been gentlemen back in England. They had little to no work experience. Knew nothing about farming or building. They had no intention of doing the work. They expected the others to feed and care for them. And as you can imagine, this didn't go over too well with the other colonists. So you had a group of people that were bougie, basically, and they was not going to do any work. They was not going to put in any work. They expected everybody to do the work for them. So then that became a problem. So now they're having an issue among themselves. Even then, the colonists in Jamestown might have survived if they had time to plant crops and harvest before the winter set in. They did plant, so they wasn't worried about food. They expected the ships to arrive from England, but only a few ships arrived. The ships brought some supplies, but the ships had been sent to take the goods back to England, but those goods had not been created by the colonists yet. So they assumed that they could plant, but they didn't understand planting in the winter is not a bright idea because the crops are not going to survive. Therefore, no crops, no food. They might have survived if they had abandoned their original settlement and moved inland, because at first they were staying on the perimeter of the land, where the sea was, where the ocean is. If they had moved inland, where food, water, and firewood were in ample supply. Of course, they did not know if the natives would remain friendly if they moved inland. And the fort they built on the island did offer some protection, but they did not move inland. If it had not been for the generosity of the Indians in the area, they would have died. As it was, with only two doctors, low supplies of food and fresh water, freezing temperatures, and almost no medicine to combat diseases, only about 100 of the original colonists actually survived Jamestown. And this thing about the medicine to combat diseases, this is how the Native Americans got diseases. They did not have them at first. The colonists brought the diseases over to the Native American land. So, what was the impact of this Jamestown excursion? I want you to go to Ed Puzzle and look at the Jamestown colony. After you finish the video, come back to this video so we can continue with our lesson. Jamestown became a more diverse colony by 1620 with the women, Africans, and Native Americans. In the beginning, women did not come over. In the beginning, only the men came over. Then later, around 1620, they started to bring other people to make it more diverse because if they didn't have the women, the actual colonies would actually die out. You have to have the women to continue with the colony. The impact of the women on the Jamestown settlement. In 1620, the Virginia Company of London sent a ship with 90 young women to Jamestown. A man who wanted to marry one of these women had to pay 120 pounds of tobacco to the ship's captain for her trip to Jamestown. Tobacco was an economic gold mine. This is how a lot of the colonists survived through tobacco. That was their trade. That's where they made a lot of their money was through tobacco. The arrival of women in 1620 made it possible for the settlers to establish families in a more permanent settlement at Jamestown. So you see pictures of children at play early in the 1620s. They wasn't playing video games. They wasn't on their computers. There wasn't no cell phones. There wasn't tick-tocking. They was actually outside playing. The impact of the arrival of the Africans on the Jamestown settlement. So let's take a look at when the slavery began. Africans arrived in Jamestown against their will. It is believed that they arrived as baptized Christians and therefore were labeled indentured servants for a period of 5 to 7 years. So when the Africans first came, they had to have an indentured servant paper. They could not be found without that indentured paperwork. So I want you to keep in mind that when they came over, they did not come over voluntarily. But when they got here, if they had the paperwork, they could work for 5 to 7 years and then get their freedom. But Virginia planters soon saw that they would need a cheap supply of labor for a long time. Because remember, the Virginia planters were gentlemen. They didn't know what they were doing. They were very bougie. Didn't want to work the land. They wanted somebody to work the land for them. Tidewater plantations were expanding because people could make so much money from tobacco. The arrival of the Africans made it possible to expand the tobacco economy. And I'm going to say again, tobacco was how they made a lot of their money. And so, because they were too lazy or didn't want to or didn't know how to tend to their own tobacco, they simply brought over Africans to do the work for them. So, Jamestown had some English settlers, but the tribe that was there was the Powhatan tribe. I want you to go to Ed Puzzle, and I would like for you to look at this video, and it's going to talk about the Powhatan tribe versus the English and how they began in the beginning, things were good, but then things kind of went left. So go back and look at that video and then come back to this PowerPoint. The Powhatan people and the English settlers, they interact. Let's take a look at that. The Powhatan people and the English settlers at Jamestown established trading relationships, and for a while, things were good. Things were positive. They worked together as a team. There was no one this person over this person. They worked together as a team because the Jamestown settlers, they knew very little. You notice here that they began to move inland, which they should have done in the first place. The Powhatans traded food, fur, and leather with the English in exchange for tools, pots, guns, and other goods. So keep in mind that the Native Americans were about the land. That's why they had a lot of food. They knew how to hunt. They hunted, they got the fur. They did not kill animals for sport. They killed them for food. They killed them to be able to have clothing. They used some of their hides for their buildings or for their homes. They had leather. They were people of the land. The English brought over things like metals. This is how the guns first got over here, because remember the Native Americans was using bow and arrows. But they also brought pots, which I'm sure made it easier to cook. And the tools were made easier because the Native Americans would make their tools out of what? What would they have available to make tools with? If you said trees or wood, you would be absolutely correct. And then they would have to figure out, they would use teeth of different animals and sharpen it in order to be able to have other kinds of tools. The Powhatan people contributed to the survival of Jamestown settlers in several different ways. And here we see the warriors, we see a Powhatan man, their shelters, a cooking pot that was found at Jamestown. Pocahontas, daughter of Chief Powhatan, believed the English and American Indians, first Americans, and I'm going to say that again, first Americans, could live in harmony. Pocahontas began a friendship with the colonists that helped them to survive. The Powhatans introduced new crops to the English, including the corn and tobacco. This is corn. And corn, you notice it is not just a yellow like we eat it. Corn comes in a lot of different varieties. The relationship between the Jamestown settlers and the Powhatans began to change. They were first on a friendly basis. Now things are starting to go left. And by the way, this is one of the shelters that they had at Jamestown. They did not live in condos. The Powhatan people realized that English settlement would continue to grow. So they started to get wise, the Native American tribe did. They started to get wise. They started to realize that, hold on, more and more settlers are coming over here. And so therefore the English settlement is going to start to outgrow us. So the Powhatans saw the colonists as invaders and that they would take over their land. In the beginning, everything was cool. Things are not so cool anymore. The English brought with it the English laws and customs, which were influenced by relationships with the Powhatans. Remember, we talked about in class assimilation. Assimilation. This is a house in Jamestown, and it looked like the English houses, but we're keeping in mind we're on Native American land. The English also began the terrible institution of slavery. Slavery is the taking of one person, forcing them to work for free, which lasted a long time because of its dependence on the tobacco economy. But Virginia grew into a culture very different from that of England because of the influence of the Africans and the Powhatans. Two men helped the colony to survive. There's an adventurer called John Smith and a businessman named John Rolfe Smith who arrived in Virginia in 1608. John Smith didn't play. He told the people, he that will not work shall not eat. And he was dead serious. So after this threat, the colonists had learned how to raise crops and they began to trade with the nearby Indians, with whom John Smith had began to make peace. So I would like for you to look at this short video, go to Edpuzzle, and learn more about John Smith. Today, Jamestown is located on an island in the James River, and this is what it would look like if you were looking at it from the sky or from a plane. Now, I want you to look at this video on Edpost. It's kind of cute. It's Powhatan tribes versus John Smith. So they kind of battling it out to see, which one is better. Let's review. Let's see what you have learned. You're going to go to Kid Blog. You have 5 questions. I would like for you to answer those 5 questions about what you learned today. If you need to go back to the video, go back to the video to help you with your answers. If you get stuck and you don't remember something, refer back to this video. And then I put this link in Edmodo. It's some very fun activities on the trail of Captain John Smith, a Jamestown adventure. So after you complete your Edmodo, you can click on that link. Once again, any questions, you can email me or you can send me a message on Edmodo.